All right, the last two videos you watched were all on graphing. This one is really just solving things algebraically. If you look at the notes above, this means we're going to essentially do train tracks, but there was two little hints there. Earlier, this year we made a to-do list and did everything backwards. This is the key though on this one. Anytime you square root, it breaks into two. Before, when we saw graphing, often we could get the value of y twice. It came out with two different x's that I could plug in and still get the same thing. So that's kind of what we need to figure out here is, can I plug in two different x's to get that same value? So if I look here and you want to make our to-do list, let's pretend x is just a random number. The very first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to square it, then I'm going to add 7. So I need to start with the bottom thing first and undo that. The opposite of adding 7 is minus 7. So I get x squared equals 81. Took care of that. Now to undo a square, we square root. And anytime you square root, it breaks into two problems because the square root of 81 could be a positive 9 or a negative 9. Both of them square to make 81. So I have to write both of them as a problem. X equals 9 and x equals negative 9. We'll put an or in between. So you really have to make sure you get that positive and negative of both. Okay, our next one, again, if I want to make a to-do list, if x were a number, the very first thing I'm going to do is square it, times it by 7, and add 1. So I'm going to do that in reverse order and do the opposite operation to undo it. So I'm going to start by minus 1, minus 1. That leaves me with 7x squared equals 28. Divide both sides by 7. X squared equals 4. Now I square root it. Something in your head should say, hey, this is where I get two solutions. So the square root of 4 could be 2, or the square root of 4 could be negative 2. All right. So this one's a little bit trickier. These are usually the ones that everybody has a hard time with, is when there's the parentheses. So if I'm going to make my to-do list, the first thing that would happen to x is it's minus 5, and then it gets squared. So I actually have to undo the square root first. So I'm going to start with that. Now, at this point is where it breaks into two, because the square root of 100 could be 10 or negative 10. So I have to write two different things. I'm going to write x minus 5 equals 10, because that square undoes, that square root undoes the square. Square root of 100 could be 10, or it could be negative 10. I'm not quite sure which one they're talking about, so I have to do both. Then I do train tracks on both to solve. So add 5. So x could equal 15, or if I add 5 here, x could equal negative 5. So it could be both of those. Before, it was always just the positive and negative version of it, but if you have to square root before you undo something else, then you're going to kind of have two different answers there. All right, let's try this one. So we've got another parenthesis one. So if x were a number, the very first thing I would do is subtract 1. I'm going to square it, and then I would times by 3. I'm getting that by just following order of operations. So if x were 7, let's say I do 7 minus 1, I get 6, do 6 squared, and then times by 3 would give me my number. So I'm going to undo the times by 3 by dividing by 3 first. So I have x minus 1 equals 9. Oops, sorry, I forgot the squared. Did that. Now I have to square root it. Again, anytime you square root it, that's where it breaks into two problems. The square root of x minus 1 squared is just x minus 1. Square root of 9 is 3, but it could also be negative 3. So I write them both, and then I do my train tracks to solve. Plus 1, x equals 4. Add 1 here, x equals negative 2. And you could go back and plug these in to make sure it's right. So let's try that. So if I plug in 4 minus 1 is 3. 3 squared is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. Now if I try this, negative 2 minus 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 squared is 9. 9 times 3 is 27, so they both work. Okay, this is a super long one. So I'm going to make my to-do list. I think that's huge on here. So if n were, let's just say it's the number 6. I would do 6 times 2 first, which would be 12. 12, and then I'd minus 11, which is 1. Then I would square it, which would be 1 still, and then I would times it by 3. Okay, again, I just picked a random number for n to help me figure out my to-do list. Now I've got to work backwards on these. Very first thing I'm going to do is get rid of that times by 3 by dividing by 3. I'm going to come down here just so I have room. So I'm left with 2n minus 11 squared equals 25. Took care of that step. Now I have to undo a square, which is a square root. That's where something in my head says, hey, give me two answers. So I have 2n minus 11 equals 5, or 2n minus 11 equals negative 5. I'm going to say it one more time. I don't know what the square root of 25, if it's a positive 5 or negative, because both of them square to get 25. So I kind of have to cover my butt and make sure I have both of them there. All right, now it's just a regular tracks problem. I'm going to add 11. I have 2n equals 16, divide by 2. N is 8, so there's 1. Add 11 here. I get 2n equals 6, divide by 2, n equals 3. So those are my two answers for that one. All right, last one. I make my to-do list. It looks like I would subtract 8. So because it's x minus 8, then I would square it, and then I times by negative 5. Divide both sides by negative 5, and I have x minus 8 squared equals negative 9. Now, if we try to square root this, if you tried plugging this in your calculator, you're going to get a message that says error, because you can't square root a negative. So anytime you end up having to try to square root a negative, it's no solution. The reason we have no solutions on here is, if you think, if I have a parabola, let's say one that looks like that, and I want to know when is it going to reach here, it never will. There would be no solution. So I could be here, no solution. It could be here, one solution, or it could be somewhere like there, and it's two solutions. So, but our key to know if it's no solution is that we're trying to square root a negative number. It just can't be done. Good luck.